Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. So I'm just going to go ahead and jump in and get us started since we're on a tight schedule because we have a lot that we want to do today with you during our hour together. So if I haven't had the opportunity to meet you before, I'm Becca and I'm the library director at CCS. So today is our second installment of the Academic Affairs Professional Development Lecture Series. And our talk today is Exemplary Classes featuring Natasha Beste and Lauren Williams. So I'm going to start by introducing Natasha first. So Natasha teaches in the Entertainment Arts Department. She has a BA from Wayne State, and she uses narrative and documentary styles to, create complex mixed media video art and installations that focus on body, mind, and trauma. And for Lauren, she's a visiting faculty in the communication department with the BA from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and an MFA from Art Center College of Design. Her work explores Blackness, identity, bodiliness, and social fictions and examines the ways in which racism is felt, embodied, and embedded into institutions. I always just like to get people's bios correct. Okay, so for the format for today's session, we're going to have our two speaker presentations, and we're also going to have our breakout rooms. And so I'm really excited to be doing breakout rooms today because I think it's an opportunity for you to really participate in this conversation. We want this to be a group dialogue where it's not just our speakers who have an opportunity to share out, but an opportunity to share amongst peers. And so our speakers have graciously offered topics for each breakout room, and we will be moderating those breakout rooms and talking with you to come up with just ways to collaborate and brainstorm strategies to apply in your own practice moving forward. And so while our speakers will be recorded, we will stop recording during breakout sessions so that you have privacy in your conversation, because it's really important that you can have a candid conversation with your group. We will also ask that you share out the main discussion points with the larger group at the end of the breakout session. And since Natasha is our first speaker today, I'm going to turn it over to her at this time. So thanks to both of you in advance, and I'm really excited to hear from you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you. It's a pleasure, honor to be speaking with Lauren, and thanks for participating, everyone. I'm Natasha, and I'm going to share my screen. So I work with students in creative visualization and advanced story concepts. I absolutely love teaching these classes and working with these students. You know, we take just sparks of ideas and we develop them into creative dynamic stories for TV, film, game. They're creating log lines. They're working with other pre-production elements like storyboards, screenplays, game design documents, animatics, proof of concepts. So it's really fun to see the pathway and the development of something that they just had a little itty bitty idea for, concept for, and to build it. One thing though that I think is really important to do is really to get them out of the perfectionist loop though. I think that's something that we all find ourselves spinning in that perfectionist loop and not able to move forward. And even to be even scared of our own ideas, scared of sharing, speaking up, even just to write them down. And I try to get them just to remember what it's like to have fun creating, have fun just drawing, letting our minds wander. And you know, to be able to share and present before they even are able to, you know, get going, I have to get them comfortable. I have to get them comfortable with me, with each other, to feel safe and excited to come to class. So we do a lot of things to stay in touch, introduce ourselves. You know, the first thing I have them do, you know, I introduce myself, and I have them answer a few questions. What do you do to play, work, create, relax? And, you know, we use the discussion board a lot, especially since we went online. You know, that's going to look a little different when we go back. But I have them post on the discussion board, and I say, okay, well, post a self-portrait and answer those questions. And then I offer the ability for other students to do fan art, create fan art. So that's really, really kind of cool. They can post fan art of their portraits they put up. And we get a lot of different combinations, and then it gets them talking, it gets them laughing. And we'll have, you know, several people do one person's. So right off the bat, you know, they're talking to each other. They love what they're, you know, seeing, what they're hearing. They're exploring themselves. So another thing, you know, they have to do a lot of presenting. So some of them are just so terrified and shy to get up in front of the classroom, or even to turn on their camera. And another thing I like to do right off the bat is just make them laugh at me, make them just go, oh my gosh, what is she doing? So we'll do we'll do charades. We'll do, you know, they create a character and they act it out. So they're embodying that character. Another thing, when we moved to online, we had them do lip sync. So I'm not going to play all of these, but this is something that I did. What is it? Matthew McConaughey, True Detective. So I'm just going to play a little bit of this.
Why should I live in history, huh? I don't want to know anything anymore. This is a world where nothing is solved. Someone once told me time is a flat circle. Everything we've ever done or will do, we're going to do over and over and over again.
All right, so I have a few other, but we're not going to have a lot of time. Just show, you know what, actually, I'm just going to show, show Jonathan's a little bit.
Junta! I got something for you. Got something you want?
So they really enjoy this. They have a lot of fun. It opens them up. We're gonna skip this one. Another, you know, tactic to get them to know each other, to be comfortable showing their face. You know, it's a little bit of like a trick because they're kind of wearing a mask in a sense, because it's not really them presenting, they're embodying this other character. So it just eases them in. Another thing that I like to do is, you know, do these quick, I want to say challenges, games. They either do it in by themselves in the classroom or in small groups. We go in breakout rooms, but I have them explore other works of art, or in this case, old 1980s movie poster, and they have to come up with their own log lines. So instead of, you know, having them develop their own ideas right away, we're looking at other work and seeing, what do we think belongs to this? What story belongs to this? And they have so much fun with this. They think that this is, you know, David Bowie and you know, they think that they're, you know, FBI agents or investigators. And then when they find out they're vampires, they just have a lot of fun. They laugh, and obviously, you know, you could do that with any other movie, but hardly any of them know what this is, and they just think it's just so funny. But it helps them start thinking about log lines and formula and breaking the formula. So that's a lot of fun. Another thing that I really like to strengthen with them too is thinking about their own stories, thinking about their own experiences, and when we're developing ideas for stories, we have to find the language, we have to find the expressive details, and be able to, yes, visually show that, but also use it with words, write it out. Something I have them do, and it's a lot of fun. It's kind of stressful on some of them, but we think about their most awesome, safe, happy, beautiful, calm place. And I have them just sit there, describe where they're at, and write directions to their like most hated, unsafe, you know, just yucky place, or they go from the yucky to the awesome. So they're learning how to, you know, they have a lot of passion about these too. So they're descriptive, using descriptive language to write this journey between the two, and they draw a map. Some, you know, is a little more abstract. So that moves into environments, and I have them listen to instrumental music, and I don't write the song titles because I don't want them to be influenced, but they're listening to music that they probably haven't heard. Maybe some of them heard, you know, the Nine Inch Nails or David Bowie. I must like David Bowie. Here he is again. But you know, they're writing descriptive language. I tell them, where are you? You're in this space. You're hearing this. So it's really cool. They're writing out what they hear, the colors, and then they move into creating visuals for that. It's a really good motivator, just a great exercise, great challenge. And I instruct them to create log lines. Pick one of these environments or combine them. Create a log line, then move on and write a story on it. So it's just a lot of fun. And then they get to compare and say, wow, I felt like I was in space, or I was in water there too, or, oh yeah, fighting or machinery. So it's just a really good, quick, like, you know, they only have like a half hour to do these assignments. So it's just very like, okay, what is important to them? What's bubbling up on the top? They don't have a lot of time to second guess themselves. And I like that. Another thing that we do, we have a media log, which is pretty intensive. They're writing down everything they consume for two weeks and all the details about it. And they don't share this. I really encourage them to be very specific, very, you know, don't change your routine to look impressive on this. Be honest. And it's so interesting to compare what, you know, you're creating, what they're creating versus what they're consuming. We discuss that a lot, and, you know, is this just passive engagement, or is it active? And why? And I like to do really short check-ins at the beginning of class. We use Jamboard. I don't know if you've ever used that before, but it's really cool. It's on Google, and you can look, you can draw, you can use little sticky notes. So I think it's cool to just get them kind of like, okay, write, you know, the basic thing that I found out, or a response to something. And then I say, okay, who wants to elaborate on this? And they can talk about it more. But they then, I'll put them in groups. And after they've, you know, discussed on their reflection on that experience, I put them in groups, and they come up with what they all have in common about their consumption of media. And then they have to come up with the most awesome, fantastic TV show idea. So, you know, all based on what they consume themselves. What would be satisfying for them? What do they think the world needs? What do we not have enough of? So it's kind of cool. Again, they have a half hour. They have to come up with a logline, title, artwork for the poster. So it's pretty neat. Some of it's a little more silly. So they have these story ideas. And then I have them write a screenplay from it. And then after the screenplay, I secretly give them each other's names and I say, okay, you go read that person's screenplay and come up with an environment that you got from that screenplay. So then they have to guess who had who. And they have a lot of fun with that too, because some of them have the same topic for the screenplay. So they have to be really, really specific with the details they put in that environment. Because for instance, like this beach, you know, oceanside and this house, these were from the same log line, and they have to say, that could be mine or that could be mine. We talk about like adding more specific details, very, you know, storytelling details. So that's really cool. Another thing is, you know, I have them write their own backstories. We develop characters and write backstories for characters, but I have them write their own for themselves, for who they are. And it's really cool because they answer, you know, what has affected you physically, mentally, in a positive, a negative way. Take that. Do you have any ideas for a story idea? And create a couple log lines. Take that, write some microfiction, pick one and illustrate it. So it's so interesting to see how, you know, you write your own backstory and it morphs into something really playful, warm. You know, it looks like a children's possible children's story or something. Blueberries, some fire, a card game. It's just, it's a lot of fun to then you know, ask them, okay, let's go backwards. How did you come up with this? Where was the inspiration? I also have them start thinking about how they have story ideas all around them. I say, look on your shelves, look on your desk, look in your boxes under your bed, whatever. What are you collecting? These are all loaded items. They all have a story behind them. And I say, collect these items that you love so much. Let's create a special space on your workspace and let's just see what happens.
Natasha?
Yeah.
Yep, you're at 14.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, thanks.
So I have them create a log line and, okay, what kind of medium would you create? And what was the inspiration for that? So it's just so cool to see what they create. And, you know, they're not required to show off their whole house or their space, just the little spot on their desk. So it's just a lot of fun and to you know, and they can take any of these ideas and turn them, you know, develop them more. And then they're using them for senior studio projects. They're using them for their own, you know, projects for even other classes. So it's just really cool to do these short, kind of intense, these challenges, because they have no time to second guess themselves or say, is it good or is it bad? They have to trust themselves and also enjoy the process. Remember that creating is fun, and to enjoy not just having done it, not the final product, but creating it. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Natasha. Did you want to share what your prompt is? Amy just put it in the Amy Lizette just put it in the chat.
Yeah. Just how do you create and strengthen classroom community? How do you get everyone comfortable with each other, comfortable with you, excited to be there?
Cool, thank you. So good afternoon. Good afternoon, thanks for having me. My name is Lauren. Normally when I present elsewhere, I mention where I'm coming from, but since we're local, I will just point out that we are on occupied Anishinaabe territory, which is better known as Wawiatanong. And I'm excited to talk to you a little bit today about critique, how I've been trying to reimagine it, and encourage students to practice criticality in the critique moment. So I'm gonna point out two statements from my teaching statement. These are extracts and I don't expect you to read the whole thing. But one of them this one focuses on the moment of critique and what I hope to kind of engender in that moment. So I'm looking for students in critique to be able to construct their own understandings of things, to generatively give feedback to one another. And most importantly, I think I'm interested in how they can begin to practice crit in a way that allows them to have a creative community and support a creative community through critique after they leave school. And then secondly, another thing that's really important to me in the way that I teach, something I prioritize, is teaching for criticality. And when I say this, I'm talking about particularly the ability to kind of question where the ideas that we adhere to come from and where power resides in them, and the histories that we inherit with them, and also the ways that we make and kind of the histories that those carry. So those two things kind of undergird a lot of the rest of what I'm going to share. And I think for me, the reason I wanted to focus on crit today is because I see that as like the one moment in art and design pedagogy when we're really like, that is where a lot of the teaching happens. And so this is a quote from Billy Lee, who's a professor at Hartford Art School. And she was also part of a group called Retooling Critique Working Group at MassArt a few years ago, where the whole group was responsible for sort of like rethinking how we practice critique, the harm it causes, and things like that. So she talks about crit as a moment where we're rehearsing how we come together as artists and designers, what we think, how we practice that creative practice, and what moves us. And so I think that's just, I want to point this out because I think it's a crucial moment in the ways that all of us teach, even if it differs depending on who we are. So before I get to kind of the criticality piece and the larger presentation, I want to offer one thing. I just want to point out some things that I'm like, these are observations I've had over the years of things that trouble me about critique and the ways that it tends to operate. And this is based on like my experience as a student, but also as an educator. And so the four things are, number one, the definition is all over the place, like different people define it different ways. Secondly, it's not something we tend to teach. Like we teach, different methods and techniques and kind of like content, but we don't always teach how to critique in the course of educating. And then thirdly, I think there's a inherited notion that critique as a painful punitive moment is like something we should all do to pay our dues. And then lastly, I think there can be crits that are particularly one directional between the professor as like arbiter of all things good and known, and student as like recipient of that. And these are things that I would like to change. So I'm not gonna spend a lot of time here, but I just want to point out this is sort of a timeline of the way that I look at the semester. And the critique moment is something that's central and huge because it happens so often, but I just want to point out that there are a lot of things that I've tried to practice, especially in the last year and a half, to sort of like shift that moment, but it doesn't all happen in the moment of critique. So I'm just pointing out here that, for example, I do a lot of things before we have our first crit and after we have crits to sort of both set students up to be able to crit well, and also to kind of evaluate how it's working and inform like changes to the crit process in a pretty immediate way. So just to clarify, those things are, before the semester starts, I do a survey to better understand students' needs. I have a presentation I offer to students. It's like a 30-minute lecture on how I define critique and what I hope they will gain from it, and some examples of like models of language and things like that. We do an exercise in Miro, which is a whiteboarding software where we set expectations for one another. And they set expectations for me as a professor, for the department, for their peers and themselves. And I do the same. And then we have a conversation where we see where there's misalignment. And that's really helpful because if we have a crit, it's really, not up to anyone's expectations. We can go back to that moment and say like, you were the ones who said it was important to be prepared for crit. And they can hold themselves accountable that way. And then on the backside, I do kind of qualitative midterm and end of year reviews that are different than what I get in the evals that the school puts out, that help me more immediately and also more qualitatively understand how students are experiencing my class and the projects that we're doing in critique. And I try to feed that back in pretty quickly if they point out things that can be changed. So here's the main point of my presentation, which is I think critique is also a site in which white supremacy, racism, oppression can be reproduced in the context of teaching. And so I want to define some concepts first. One, I want to point out that when I talk about white supremacy, I'm not referring necessarily to people in hoods or white supremacist hate groups. The idea here is more that white supremacy is an idea that white people and white ideas, thoughts, beliefs, or actions are superior to others. And so that's what I'm talking about when I use that word. And I think just as a basic point that will kind of undergird the rest of this presentation, the classroom, the school, the private school especially, the art world, are all sites and social institutions where white supremacy does get reproduced and upheld and validated. And so for me, it's really important that the classroom is a place where we try to take that apart, but critique specifically as a moment is one time that we can do that. So I'm going to give 5 examples of ways in which I see crit reproducing racism and things that I try to do to counter it. The first is something that doesn't exist only in the moment of crit, but I think a lot of times crit can be a moment where we reinforce or reinscribe rules that are rooted in white supremacist ideas and ideologies. And what I mean by this is, for example, in design, which is what I teach, this is a quote from Jen Wang, who's written an article about Helvetica and modernism and how it kind of reinforces white supremacy. And she said that by creating these aesthetic standards of design and type, modernism codified white supremacy into visual form. And I think, again, this is more of a curricular problem than it is a crit problem, but it gets reinforced in that moment. And I think, to be clear here, it's also about the act of, I think where the problem lies is in presuming Westernness or whiteness as universal, as neutral, as normative, and everything else is not. And this shows up in ways where we define, for example, sans serif typefaces, Helvetica specifically, as neutral. When we think about rationality, when we talk about the rules that we adhere to as designers and artists as well. I'm going to speak to what I know in terms of design. And so I think the point here is, how can we be mindful of where these ideas come from? It's not about the idea that rules are bad, but they come from a place, and that place is steeped in white supremacy. This is just another way to demonstrate the same thing, but I'm actually going to breeze past it for the sake of time. So what I try to do instead is to interrogate rules rooted in white supremacy through critique. And so this is something that requires a lot of things listed here. One, it requires that I study the ways in which white supremacy shows up and makes its way into our knowledge systems. It requires that I articulate the source of ideas to students and help them understand that they do come from a place and they have a position. It also requires using that moment to intentionally challenge the presumption of whiteness as central. And then lastly, one thing I try to do a lot is encourage students to be very specific, because I think the presumption that, this is for everyone, or I'm designing this for everyone, is something that's really steeped in that same idea of normative whiteness that I mentioned before. The second thing is that crit can be a place where we offer references exclusively limited to white people, or especially male, able-bodied, cis, the list goes on, folks. And so something I try to do is, in contrast, offer references that can expand students' realm of influence beyond the traditional canon. And again, this isn't exclusively limited to crit, but crit's a place where it gets reinforced. So this is something that requires me to study, again, different artists and different types of creative producers to make sure that I can insert these references where students need them. Thirdly, and this I think is one of the most harmful to me, is that crit can be a place where we don't address or avoid interpersonal expressions of racism that come up in crit. In my opinion, it does more harm to students of color especially, but including to white students who would eventually leave without the capacity to really recognize racism, then it does more harm to not address stuff than it does to try. So in contrast, I try to thoughtfully address these moments as they come up. And what that requires of me is, oh, sorry, I forgot I put animations in here. So this requires a few things. One, again, study. So I just want to reinforce that this isn't just something I know, I have to study these things. So studying, to be able to recognize, to be able to recognize when I am hearing something that is in fact racist, whether the student understands that or not. Secondly, being able to pause in the moment and intervene is something that also takes practice. And then thirdly, something that helps is being able to ask clarifying questions and draw out further kind of like reasoning to understand where the student is coming from, not to say that their point of view is valid if it's racist, but instead to be able to respond in kind with like the sort of education that would help them move ahead. The fourth thing that I find harmful is ignoring or avoiding substantive discussions about content in crit when it in fact does have to do with something related to a racialized experience or something like that. And so in contrast, something I try to do is to cultivate space for and facilitate substantive discussions about content instead. And this is a place where criticality for me is hugely important, and trying to give students the tools to kind of question the assumptions that they put into their work. And so again, this is a place that requires a number of things. For me, it means making the classroom a regular site where we discuss contemporary events related to racism and white supremacy, so they understand that this is the place where we have these conversations. It's not out of bounds. Secondly, it also requires kind of openly identifying and talking about moments when I see in their work appropriation or stereotyping or tokenism. Thirdly, it requires kind of giving students the tools and inviting them to really consider the social and political implications of the things they're making, even if it doesn't appear to be explicitly political. And then lastly, I think another thing I've tried to do is make tools so that we can facilitate crit in better ways that build an analysis around power and oppression and things like that. So this is an example of a tool I tried to make. So this was for our junior research class, and I was really trying to get students to consider questions about power as they were learning about Detroit. So this is a class where they're researching social issues in Detroit, which is already fraught considering the majority of our students are white and from the suburbs. So that conversation started out in a place that had a differential power relationship to the questions they were asking. And so this is a format I made where I very explicitly asked them to identify, based on the questions they're asking, who's affected by it, who has power over it, who can shape its outcomes, who else is a stakeholder in this, whether outside of the individual who might experience a problem such as homelessness or housing insecurity. And then beneath all this, they also have to say, what are the assumptions that they are coming to it with? So they have to say it out loud. And that's something that I found really helpful this year. Okay, and lastly, something I've tried to do, or something that I see happening in crit, and this is something that's a little more subversive, but also I think reinforces a lot of the same ideas, is that crit, the way that it's often run, privileges spoken and verbal communication in English. And this might not seem like a big deal at a school in the United States, but I think considering the fact that we have students from other places, the fact that we have students from who speak many languages, and English might not be the only one. Something I've tried to do to counter how this can sort of privilege English and privilege Westernness as a construct too, is to vary the ways that we do crit, basically. And this is something that I think also helps in a number of other ways. But what that's looked like for me is sometimes moving between small group crits where they can talk more personally with one another, and one-on-one crit, rather than having the entire class speak to each other as if they're presenting. A second thing has been making space for written feedback so that people have more time to think, not necessarily that writing in English is any easier than speaking verbally, but I think having time does change the way students can respond. Thirdly, I've also used Miro for critique a lot, and sometimes that makes it easier, I think, for students to like pinpoint a visual element of a project and respond directly to that, rather than having to construct a whole way of leading the recipient into that information. And then lastly, something that I've tried more recently has been creating more space to process crit after the fact. So as an example, this is a screenshot of a Miro board that we've used actually in the same junior studio. So they have these projects where they are responding to something that they learned during research with a design. And so in this form, I'm asking them to input some information before critique. So they had 15 minutes to sit and state what their goal was of the project in the red part. In the green part, state who their audience is or who they intend to be the recipient of their project. And then lastly, in the bottom purple part, to dictate what feedback they actually need. So they can direct people toward specific questions they have, or toward parts of the project that aren't going as they would want, and make sure that we aren't, responding to things that are not central to the way that they want their project to evolve. So this did a few things. It brought,
Lauren?
oh yeah.
Oh yeah, we're at time, so I don't mean to cut you off, but I do want to save time for the discussion as well. So if you want to wrap up with your final thoughts, thanks.
Yeah, I just have one more slide, so I'll just finish. And so this did a few things. It brought the objective front of mind, but it also made it so that we did this crit, they could get the notes immediately. And then in the next class, we're having a conversation about the feedback that they got. So the point I want to make today is just that if we don't learn how to challenge white supremacy in crit, we only reproduce it. And the question that I want to pose to you in groups is this one. So what could you do to commit to do to prepare yourself to actively challenge white supremacy in crit? And what would that require of you? And I think even if you don't teach, hopefully you saw ways in which this applies to administration and other types of work that happen at the college. So thank you.